Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Heather Villa, Frank Galindo, and Lisa Peluso. And I want to ask the question, how do you manage your triggers during an argument? Heather, can you kick us off?
I think the biggest part of it is starting the conversation and declaring your intentions. I think in these conversations, a lot of people have really good intentions. And if that's not set up front, things go by the wayside. So I like to clarify my intentions and then just be very clear about what I'm trying to accomplish. I want to help, or I want to help solve this problem. Let's work together better, be more efficient. This is supposed to be a good, productive conversation. It's not something negative. It's an opportunity.
Okay.
Well, Heather,
go
ahead, Frank.
No, please, ladies first.
Who you call a lady? Heather, you make it sound so easy, but I will say my short answer to this question, Robyn, is, oh my gosh, I don't do it very well. And you can ask my husband who's in the next room. But seriously, this is so tough, especially when you're in the heat of something and you feel something bubble up. So my first two rules for myself, which I'm getting better at, is first is pause. Literally just take a deep breath and say, okay, this is not going to matter to me in 5 years. So even though it feels awful right now, or it might feel awful for the next hour, it's okay. And the second one is to really name whatever I'm feeling there. So sometimes I just feel angry, like that's, and then I'm like, it's not anger. I'm frustrated that they don't understand me. I'm not being heard, or I'm hurt from something way long ago that happened that was similar. And I'm making assumptions about them judging me or something. And that's, I need to sort of name that and figure that out and sit with that before I progress. So those are my first steps that I usually take. Go ahead, Frank.
No, thank you. I love what you said. As far as the steps are concerned, for me, to lead into those steps, I have to begin with awareness. And it's just such a difficult thing to do. And for me, it's taken a lot of practice because I would fly off the handle. And so it was for me to be aware of how I was feeling, identifying those triggers in the moment, which again is a lot easier said than done. And then once I'm aware of how I'm feeling based on what's being said, what's taking place in the conversation, then I kind of step into what you said, Lisa, and those taking those steps additionally, because you have a tendency sometimes to just get involved in the heat of the moment, and it doesn't do either side any good. And back to Heather's point, once intentions have been laid out, then hopefully you realize you don't have to go in that direction. You don't have to fly off the handle. But again, when things happen, kind of go back to the awareness and then the steps. So it's all full circle and it's all interconnected. And it's just so important to be able to identify those things and control them, in the moment productively, and be able to also put yourself, I think, in the other person's shoes as well, hopefully understanding ahead of time the conversation. And that will hopefully help to keep things focused on what you're really talking about, right? The topic at hand, not the reaction to the topic, but the actual topic, if that makes sense.
I love that you brought up awareness, because when I teach creating productive conflict, one of the first things I tell people is you've got to know what your communication fingerprint is. How do you handle conflict? What is your psychosomatic response to conflict? Because if you don't know what yours is, you won't recognize it when it starts to bubble and your trigger is getting ready to be pulled and you're like, oh, and then and you're too far. So understanding, being aware and knowing before you're in it is kind of here's how you do this, or otherwise it's never going to work.
Right.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we just have to sit with whatever is creating the discomfort in us. I mean, I was a smoker for years. I hate to admit that now, but I lived in Tokyo where everybody smoked, and quitting smoking, I was finally able to do when I would have cravings to just experience the craving. And I think this is that awareness that you were talking about, Frank, is being aware, and also being aware, Robyn, of the way I communicate, but that the other person may be very, very different. And the way they're perceiving this is totally different. So my other trick I use a lot, I was thinking about this morning, is ABI, AABI, always assume best intention. And I have that written on my wall in my office, because sometimes I'm just not seeing eye to eye to someone. I have to remind themselves that their intentions are good. They have a goal they're trying to reach. And sometimes I just need to step back and say, deep breath, like this isn't personal. This is about trying to meet goals.
I jokingly often say to my clients, not everyone you know can be a psychopath.
Yeah, that's a great one. I love that. I love that acronym, Lisa. Always assume best intentions. When you're judgmental, like I am, and I'm working on improving that. When you're judgmental, that's the first thing you do is assume the worst intentions of someone. But if you assume the best intentions, and like I said before, once you've assumed that and then put yourself in their shoes, I think that combination kind of helps to reframe the conversation, your perspective when you're talking to someone. So that's always helpful. And the discomfort actually you mentioned is good. Sorry, the discomfort is very good. Sorry.
I think it's also important with the awareness. We know what our triggers are, but if you haven't worked through a plan of how you're going to handle it, because they will come up, you're always going to have difficult conversations. That's part of life. But if I don't actively have a plan when this happens, how am I going to de-escalate myself? You're going to keep making the same mistakes.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's not enough to be aware. You're absolutely right, Heather. You have to know, all right, I'm aware. Now what?
Have to have a plan.
I'm going to keep flying off the handle. I'm aware. Great. Now you're aware that I'm angry or whatever.
So Heather, what's your plan? I want to hear your plan.
Yes. What's the plan?
My plan is to stop. Just stop and breathe. And a lot of the time that silence will open up the conversation. I'm very extroverted. So that's also hard for me sometimes to give the other person an opportunity to speak. But if I stop myself when I know things are starting to get a little bubbly, as you guys say, then it gives them an opportunity to speak up. And usually that clarifies their intentions too, or gives me some knowledge of where they're coming from and why this is happening and what is actually going on, getting to the root cause of the problem.
Being able to recognize and call a timeout is one of the strongest things that you can do. And the thing is, though, you have to, the person you're talking to, you have to have kind of a team communication fingerprint between you, because if you're in the middle of a heated conversation and you're just like, wait, hold it, time out, they're going to be like, what are you doing? So that's one of those things you have to do ahead of the time to be able to say, as a group or as a team or as a couple, when we get into a heated situation and I recognize it or you recognize it, one of us has to be able to say, hold on, let's take a minute and breathe.
Right. That might be easier to do, I guess, between married couples or people that are involved, maybe more so than, I don't know, you and a stranger, or maybe you and your boss. I don't know, kind of throwing that out.
It works really well on teams when I work conflict resolution and productive conflict with teams, teaching them to do that, or teaching them to say like a simple word. Like if someone says something and it's painful, just say like, ouch. Like, did you mean for that to hurt? Or did you was that an accident? What happened there? And that just awareness, but you have to set that stuff up front. You have to have those conversations first, which is why I have workbooks written in my books to help people kind of work through this so they can share it. Because if you don't know who you are, you certainly can't explain it to someone else.
Great point.
I did have an experience recently with a direct report, and things got really heated and I was not in a space to deal with it. I was just so stressed out that day. And I said to her, we're going to need to come back to this conversation. I need a break now. And she was not comfortable with that. She wanted to work it out right then. She wrote me a note and said, can we talk ASAP? I just want to clarify this. And I said, absolutely. And we got back on a Zoom and talked through it. But in that case, she wasn't real happy about my taking the break, but I needed that to be the leader that I wanted to be with her. And
kudos to you.
It worked out. Well, it worked out well. I wish I could have stayed in the moment there. And I think because, like you say, Dr. Robyn, we didn't have sort of an agreement about this, and you won't always. But I did learn from that I need to take that pause, and maybe it needs to be internal in the moment and get better at that. So we're all learning and growing.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, it's so basically, I think what we've come up with is you have to be aware of what your triggers are. You have to recognize them when they're happening, and then you have to have a plan of action. And that plan of action ideally will also involve the people maybe that you interact with regularly. So they recognize that when you're walking away or taking a time out, it's because you need to regroup, not because you're just done talking to them. So
Right.
I want to say thank you for having this conversation with me. That is our 10 minutes. So I'm going to cut us off there. I've really enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to each of you again very soon.
Thanks, Dr. Robyn.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Robyn.